Welcome back to Boiler Wild. My name is Eric Johnson, and on today's episode, Jonathan Sanchez with Miura America joined me to talk boilers and connectivity in the boiler room. Jonathan is currently the product manager for Miura Connect, which is a connection system and service that allows for greater data visibility for equipment in the boiler room. We had a great conversation about how he accidentally got into the boiler world, how more training isn't always the answer, how connectivity in the boiler room can help keep plant uptime high, and why more notifications can lead to problems being overlooked. Thank you to Jonathan for joining me on this episode. I hope you, the listener, can get some value from it and learn something new. If you have any other questions or comments about this episode or anything else, please email me, eric.johnson@boiler.com. What have you been up to in the last 6 months?
Gosh, I think lots happened in 6 months. We've done a few things with Miura Connect. So we're able to run it on a Raspberry Pi now. So trying to get some variability in running our monitoring software on other equipment. We were able to get some installations done at some pretty large facilities. One of them was a university in North Carolina. So we're working towards finishing that one up. And there's some stuff happening behind the scenes, but I think you know that we're partnering with our sibling company, Cleaver Brooks, in some items. So we're hoping to hopefully in the near future come out with something that we're collaborating with them on a unified platform. So
An auto commissioning boiler.
that would be great.
All these manufacturers, they're like, oh, look at this new cool thing. Look at this cool thing. I'm like, until you have auto commission and it sets everything up perfectly, I don't really care. I want to plug in my combustion analyzer. The combustion analyzer goes back to it and it will just slowly step through the curve. It'll set up all the settings. It'll be a quick start. And it takes the human element out of it. You just have to monitor it. And until that happens, I think we're severely underestimating what we could do.
Do you think the law would allow for that? Something like that auto commissions and
with all the systems, you have all these like parallel positioning trainings and everything, and they're like 1 to 2 days, maybe 3 days. But if you don't see the system in the next week to a month, you're going to forget everything and be lost. And there's 400 settings for everything. Yes. Can you train people to really learn these systems really well and set them up well? Yes. But it should literally walk you through of like, hey, do this. Hey, do this. These are the 25 settings you have to set, and this is how you want to set them, and like give you instruction and like a quick start guide and everything. Nobody has a system like that because right now, a lot of the training, and I was talking with FireEye about this, is a lot of the training is, well, we just need to train more and people just need to get better. And it's like, okay, but like at a certain point, you're just going to have to realize that whoever sells the system that the average HVAC technician can understand versus a seasoned boiler person, not everybody works on boilers 24/7. And there's a lot of resistance towards parallel positioning only because, not that it's bad, but companies don't sell it because they don't have anybody that can work on it. And if you're an average HVAC tech and you see boilers for 6 months out of the year, it's going to be hard to learn any parallel positioning system enough to commission one and to troubleshoot it competently versus a system that, hey, we're going to make this as easy as possible and we're going to totally rethink about how we go about, instead of a 400 settings list and menu and this and that, where, it'll be just a commission the burner guide and, you just go through and just answer yes or no questions. Hey, what do you want for this? What do you have for this? And you just go through and, maybe it's on your phone and, it beams over to the controller, and like, there's so many ways to go about it versus what we're doing now. And it's easy as a product to say, well, people just need to learn it better. We just need more training. I've learned that sometimes training isn't the answer. The number one step for safety is, instead of saying, well, people just need to be more safe, it's, well, can we put in more engineering controls? And if you can put in an engineering control versus that's like step one versus PPE, the engineering control is always the preferred way to go because, instead of saying, well, just wear your fall protection, well, we're going to just make it so that people can't fall. So we're going to put in a railing or whatever. Same thing with a burner system or any kind of boiler system is instead of saying, well, people just need to get more training, you just say, well, how do we make this so that the average HVAC technician can understand this and that so average HVAC mechanical companies can sell this and feel comfortable with this versus, you just need more training and become more experts because HVAC technicians, they're out of bandwidth. You can't be an expert on everything. And if you're a general mechanical doing general mechanical service, you're trying to learn 30 different platforms of manufacturers from air handlers, chillers, boilers, all this stuff. You'll never learn it all. And you'll have resistance to sales based on what your people can sell.
I think you're
do you agree with
absolutely
that?
right. Absolutely right. Yeah, I'm running into that with the skill sets that we're asking candidates and employees to bring. We want you to be water chemistry experts, burner experts, and on top of that, boiler networking controls, and then slap my portion on it, right, which is monitoring. Now we're asking them to be pretty tech savvy. We're asking them about IP addresses, like, hey, we're setting up Modbus, we're setting up BACnet, or, we're trying to set up a cellular signal so that we can get data out to the server. And they're like, come on, man, I just work on boilers. Now I've got to be a computer scientist to get these features out. And I've walked through like home automation stuff. It seems to be pretty simplified, but it's also not doing as much, right? Light on, light off, color on, blue, red, right? If we can get to a point where, like you're saying, you can walk them through a guide on how to set it up, very picture based or video based, then I think we can get a lot more onboarding. A lot of people can get on the train and say, yeah, I can stand behind this because I know I can do it. Whereas we make these systems somewhat complex and, I'm in it every day, but the person who's seeing it for the first time is like trying to learn it at sprinter's pace. It's like, hey, it's there. We're installing it. We got to go now. So yeah, we're running into that skill set not being, at least in the boiler industry, that we're missing some of that, and trying to recruit for that makes it more difficult because you're almost leaving candidates behind because they can't pick up the maybe more technical or computer aspect of it. Because as we move towards that, some of the best technicians that we have are from a previous generation, let's say. We don't want to lose their skills, but we also need to give them more so that we can do the things that we're asking them to do.
I don't think it's something unique to the boiler industry though. I think a lot of industries want very rounded people. I feel more is asked of people because if you just think about the boiler, say you just work on boilers, and if somebody has a boiler, you'll show up as a contractor. So you got to learn everything from 1960s technology to 2026 and in between. And when boilers were just, we have some mechanical linkage and the flame safeguards are a bunch of mechanical relays and all this stuff. Yes, it's a little bit more complicated. You don't have anybody to call and everything, but like the world was slower and everything. But now we have all this engineering and IT and everything. But it's, by the way, you also have to be good mechanically and understand fluid dynamics and, understand electrical. So like working on boilers, it's difficult because you're trying to be a part-time IT, part-time electrician, part-time, fluid person, combustion, and I feel like I know nothing and all I do is boilers. But the average person in the market is somebody who's a HVAC technician who works on everything. Like, if I feel like I know nothing, how are they supposed to know anything? And that's the issue with, while I like technology and I think technology is great, just because your engineering team can dream it up and they understand it doesn't mean that the average person is going to be able to understand it, because now, unless they constantly work with that system, there's going to be resistance no matter what, and you're going to have issues. And I think all manufacturers are seeing that on all levels outside of even boilers. You can dream up these amazing air handlers, but you put on all these variable speed fan walls and everything and all these controls, the equipment's only as good as the commissioning. And if it's not basically perfect for what the manufacturer wants, the customer's going to be disappointed in the results. And there's a huge gap. I don't know how to cover it. I mean, you got any suggestions?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm in a slightly different situation where, like, I started with Miura back in 2012, and I have only worked on Miuras. So, like, I don't have the vast knowledge of many other boiler manufacturers. If you were to plop me in front of someone else's burner, I'd be that guy on the phone trying to get somebody on the other line or go through their manuals and try and figure out, okay, where do I need to poke and prod? On the other hand, having only worked on Miuras, I have that benefit of being able to get down into the weeds and really understand, like, that product, right? And it's a unique situation in that we don't really have these, like, specialists in one manufacturer. You have to be that jack of all trades, right? So, and you're exactly right with the technology, right? We had a previous monitoring system. I mean, we still maintain it. It's legacy equipment, but it sends data through a 56K modem, right? So that old fax modem that you would hear if you were receiving a fax, or if you ever connected to AOL, right? They were using that to transmit data back and forth. So not only do you have to be a boiler expert, now you got to be like a telecom guy. And then we've since upgraded. We've got cellular, we've got internet now, but back in the 80s and 90s, that was the hurdle. We were trying to get people to get on board with modems, 56K modems, and dialing in and hearing that fax sound, that screech to have the handshake. So I think it's almost like it's on replay, right? If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. But like I say, we are moving significantly faster. And I guess generating interest in these fields and in the younger generations too. Like, I came on when I was 22, like right out of school. That's a challenge because what does everyone want to be now?
YouTuber,
yeah, influencer. What else was the other thing? I guess you can't really be an AI, but you can be an AI user. Yeah, and that's been, kind of flooding the industry as well. It's like, how can we use AI tools to not only maybe teach, but to support? Like, I had to create an agent for maintenance support that was like, hey, we're going to load up a bunch of manuals. We're going to train it, and we're going to ask you guys to try and use it to see if we can get usable answers off of this thing. It's been internal mostly, but deploying that to a platform was something that we were asking, is this what people want? Do they want to talk to a computer, or do they want to talk to somebody? I've noticed that at least when I was doing my support role in maintenance support, was a lot of people wanted email. Some people wanted calls. Like, it was very skewed towards, like, everybody liked the email. And then younger generations too, they were really into, like, texting or messaging, right? They didn't really want the whole long format of an email. They just wanted to get a quick answer from somebody. So I think you have to hit it from a few different angles. But most people did not like chatbots. They were That's not what they wanted, even though that we felt that the industry was like pushing us that way.
Everybody's like AI this, AI that. And right now, AI is pretty much text response answers. And everybody's like, well, you can get the answer to anything you want. And I'm like, well, yes, but we've had the internet for probably since 2015. It's been pretty good as far as everybody basically has a smartphone, and the internet's come a long way. But since 2015, you could basically get any answer you wanted, yet you still have people calling tech support or emailing for answers that are really readily available online, or even in a manual that is in front of them. This belief that just because people can get the answer, or you expect them to know how to get the answer, that they're going to get the answer, is false. Like, just because AI exists doesn't mean people are going to use it. And also, when it prints out a text wall to you, a lot of people just say, like, they just like look at it and go like, I'm not reading that. Like, I don't know what this means. I just want to call somebody and have them tell me the answer. I believe having the data available, if somebody's seeking it, I think that's a positive. But to say that, like, human nature is going to change and that people are going to all of a sudden be more self-sufficient because now this information is being presented in a new format, I think is completely false. You'll have adopters, but if they didn't go on the internet or go in a manual to search for the answer, they're not going to go to AI to search for the answer either.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I ran into many similar situations like that where I was emailing somebody back. They had asked for something, I forget what, but I sent back the manual. I said, here's the manual. And then very quick, soon after, they were like, I didn't ask you for the manual. I asked you for the solution. So I'm like, okay, fair point. Like, yeah, I know I just sent you about 200 pages worth of something, but so we went down and, I said, okay, on this page and on this paragraph, let's try this, and then we can go from there. But no, you're absolutely right. I think you can have somewhat of like information overload where you don't know where to begin, I guess. And in that aspect, I think it could maybe point you in the right direction, the AIs at least, right? But yeah, I think people want guidance, not necessarily just information for information's sake. And with training too, like we had different versions of a training program where we would bring people for a week and just plop them in a classroom for 4 days, throw PowerPoints at them, expect them to retain it, and then have like a day of hands-on. We have switched that around where we're doing more web-based, self-paced, slideshows and videos, but when they come to our facility, they actually are hands-on most of the time. Like if we're there, we're on the equipment. So I think repetition definitely drives efficiency on that. So like actually being in front of the thing you're talking about helps, as opposed to just seeing it on a board or on a PowerPoint or in a video. So we've been slowly migrating towards actual instructor-led and hands-on training where, you're guided through the process, not necessarily just shown the process and expecting you to retain it.
So you graduate college, I think, right?
Yeah, so I live in Georgia now, but I'm originally from California. I went to University of California, Irvine, and my background, I had changed my major a few times. I thought I was going to be a physics major, then aerospace engineering, and then I landed with mechanical engineering with a specialization in mechanical design. So coming out of college, I was a waiter at a restaurant, so I'd done that job throughout, earning cash to help pay for school. I graduated in 2010, so it was right after the 2008 stuff. So landing a job was kind of hard. About a year after, I found my first job in, I would say, like a professional sense, where I worked in for a company that did home automation hardware and software. So we would install keypads, dimmers, switches, and remotes, stuff with dual band where it could broadcast not only over the air but on the power line. This company utilized an interesting communication method. There's alternating current in your house, right? There's single phase, 120, 60 hertz. Well, at the zero crossing, when there was 0 volts on the line, it would actually transmit data through the copper wires in your house. And that's how it communicated to other switches that weren't wireless. So at the zero crossings, they would send little packets of data. And in order to strengthen the signal, what they would do is they would echo. So if one device heard that message, it would echo it, and they would hop it 3 times. After the third hop, it wouldn't echo anymore. So it could get to a device on your house, on the other side of your house if you needed to. They also had wireless. We had to plug in like little wireless access points if you wanted to hit remotes and stuff. But that was my introduction to like wiring, electrical, signal communication. Worked there for about 6 months, and a classmate of mine reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, do you want to come work for Miura?" I was like, "Sure." I didn't know what it was. I didn't really do much research into it, but I quit my job, and then I was like, I had to wait about 3 months to go through the interview process. But finally, I was hired in about my first day was February 13th of 2012. I drove up from Orange County to Hayward, California, and it's about 400 miles. Worked there for about a year doing field engineering. So basically started with like water sampling, checking boiler water chemistry, trying to figure out what all that meant. We would take all the samples and take the measurements and get an understanding of, okay, these values are good, these values are not. That led to learning how to inspect the boiler, doing what we call a basic or an external inspection, which is mostly gas and combustion tuning, testing of safeties, to an internal inspection where we're, taking apart the pressure vessel, opening the burner. And then eventually that led to like commissioning new boiler rooms and equipment. So did that for a while, lived in Utah briefly, moved back to Southern California, did that for a few more years. And then in 2017-ish, I took on a maintenance support role. And that was primarily to, help develop training. That was one of the primary goals, but also to support our technicians throughout the U.S., as well as our rep network. So that the reps that did service, we would provide sort of a point of contact for them so they didn't have to message, their local technicians that were also dispatched. So it kind of took a load off of them. Did that till about last year, almost about 10 months ago. And while doing that, we're learning how to set up our networks, right? So our internal networks that the controller speaks to the boilers with, it speaks to the water softeners or chemical doser, water monitoring system. And so that got me the basis of understanding how to get like the boiler data to our monitoring point. So each branch had a computer where we could literally dial into computers that had a phone line. We were starting to migrate some to cell phone lines. And then eventually we have stuff that connected over the internet through a VPN, right? So that kind of naturally led me to when we debuted Miura Connect. I had a curiosity about that, and it sort of landed in my lap in that I had to support it and commission them, but I wasn't in the development of it. And we were reporting kind of bugs back up, up the chain and getting them resolved. And eventually the position became available for product manager. So I threw my hat in the ring, and I've been our Miura Connect product manager since October of 25. So we've done some neat things with it, but there's a lot more to do. So that's sort of my arc there.
So you got a mechanical engineering degree, and you get on with this boiler company. What was the training like? Because I think a lot of people in the boiler industry, it's hard to remember what day one is like, or even year one. of like there's so much assumed knowledge that you think is basic for somebody that's coming from an outside, and even, somebody with a mechanical engineering degree. Like, yeah, you're familiar maybe with like what steam in a boiler is, but all the terms and everything, you at a certain point in time, you still have to learn everything. People aren't just born with knowledge. What did that process look like, and what do you think worked and didn't work?
It's funny that you say that because I don't even think I had seen a boiler, but for maybe one time when we had a central plant tour of the university from one of our classes. I couldn't even tell you what it was now. It's been so long, but I actually do remember day one, and it was at a like meat processing plant. They made sausages. So like literally I got to see how the sausage was made on day one. I was like, what did I get myself into? You have your degree, you think you're gonna be like working on CAD or something, you don't really know what the jobs are, but on day one they hand you like the smock, the hair thing, and a wrench, and they say, all right, let's get to work. All right, okay. Originally the training was very, hands-on, OJT, on the job training, right? So a lot of it was just me shadowing a technician who had been there just a little bit longer than me and was showing me what he had just learned. So eventually we were sent to our headquarters for what we were calling at the time like factory training. We stayed there for, depending on when you came in, sometimes it was 3 weeks, sometimes it was like 1 or 2 weeks. But it was classroom with, a culmination of hands-on. You would pick a boiler and you would do an inspection on it. They would sort of grade you on that. And there was a written portion too, very open-ended, short answer. They wanted to see how you retain the knowledge, not necessarily that you could pick the right, multiple choice. So that made scoring a bit difficult, but that was a lot of the training was, you're seeing it for the first time. You have someone who had been there a little bit longer than you. The one thing I would say about uh, Miura that they did is because it was, it wasn't technology necessarily created here. We imported some of the controls from Japan, so they would bring advisors from Japan to instruct us. So one of my best teachers actually is Takahiro Kondo, or Chuck. We called him Chuck. But he taught me how to work on boilers with very little English. It was actually interesting. Like, we didn't speak each other's language yet. He was probably one of my greatest teachers. So boiler learning transcended our language, I guess. A lot of no's. That's how you found out what not to do. But he would demonstrate by doing, even non-verbally. He could transfer that knowledge to me, and was able to learn a lot from him. And we spent probably a few years together in Orange County, him and I, along with other technicians. And he imparted a lot of his wisdom, his experience on us in the regions.
What do you say doesn't work, or what should companies avoid when starting somebody off who is brand new?
I think they should avoid assuming that people know the jargon right off the bat. I mean, there's so many acronyms and words, specialized phrases that maybe like just your boiler uses or our industry uses. It's one of the things where I've noticed that the people who've had sort of the most success with it, they have a mentor or somebody who's there with them, shadowing them for 90 days, let's say, or even longer. But what I would say to try and avoid is like, I personally think that when you hire someone and then put them on an island, like if they're a satellite office or if they're just a guy in a truck who dispatches from his house, like that's really difficult for that person to feel connected, A, to the company, but like B, they're always unaware of some of the resources or all of the resources that are available to them because they are on that island. Just because we need coverage in a certain area, um, you know, I think it's almost a disservice to just kind of throw someone out there and say, okay, you're covering the entire state of wherever. And, we'll send someone down every once in a while to help you cover, but, I think you should have a bit more structure before you put somebody out there, in isolation to try and cover an area, even though, the need is there. Yeah, not leaving them alone. That's probably one of the biggest things I would say is let them know they've got support, coverage, and a whole host of resources behind them before, we're sending them out and saying, okay, you're the face of the company in this whole state.
The onboarding process I found is not great. A lot of contractors, or I guess companies in general, you're lucky to have 2 days onboarding, if that, of like scheduled. Like, hey, this is what we're doing. And it really needs to be like 6 months, especially if they're brand new. Because there's this belief that, oh, well, it's on the job training. We'll just send this guy out with this other experienced person and they'll just learn from him. But I've been doing a lot of thinking on this. And while everybody's like, oh, well, these experienced people need to be nicer to these people, they need to be more understanding and all this stuff, it would be like sending somebody out who's never played football with a pro football player. And they're like, hey, practice together. Oh, and by the way, you need to win a game together as well. If you send somebody out that's not experienced, you can't expect the same schedule and timeline as two experienced people working together to get the job done. But it's also, if the person is brand new, even if they have a mechanical engineering degree, the gap nowadays with people between like what people are growing up with, like if people are growing up and not turning a screwdriver, knowing what an adjustable wrench is till they're in their 20s. And if you start off in the boiler world, and if you're one of those people of like, oh, I'm going to get into this, and then you work with a guy who's 50 who, was working on his dad's car when he was 7, the gap is so wide and the assumed knowledge is so wide that they're going to get extremely frustrated pretty quick with the new person because they're like, go grab this tool. And the new person won't even know what the basic tool is. But now the experienced person will easily get frustrated because how do you not know this? And then the new person will also get frustrated because they'll feel dumb of like, well, I'm just supposed to know all this information. But like the gap is just so wide between the two knowledge levels that I think if you're bringing somebody brand new on and they just don't have any experience, and you have to understand that growing up, like that's experience. Like, hey, like, do you have your own set of tools? If they say no, you have to treat it totally different versus, yeah, I work on my 4-wheeler on the weekends. And that may be a whole different hiring process. If you're having to teach somebody the name of tools, you have a very wide gap to cover before they even start getting good at like understanding what's going on in a boiler room. And a lot of employers are not set up to cover that gap. And it's a sink or swim gap. And they just expect people to figure it out. And a lot of times they don't. And the new person gets frustrated and then they quit and they think, well, this isn't for me and whatever. But it could be for you. It's just there's the not right support system. I don't think the trades in general have developed a support system to cover that gap because I don't know what's changed. I don't like to blame like all this like whole industry trends or like, oh, young people don't want to work and stuff. But like it is true that we went from America that everybody grows up with tools, fixing their own stuff, to now people sub that all out and people are living very isolated lives. So there's a lot of hands-on learning that goes into a childhood that children are not getting anymore, that the skilled trades took for granted. And now they're trying to train people that don't have those skills. And I don't know if employers can overcome that gap. They just have to find people who grew up a certain way, which is a totally different way of interviewing. But to have a onboarding, I would agree with you that having a mentor, having somebody to like, hey, this is your point of contact. It's not even like, hey, this is your boss, but like, this is the person that's going to be like checking in on you, or like, hey, when you have a question, like, who is familiar with your situation, and not just, oh yeah, we have a whole team of people, call whoever you want. Because now, if you think about it, if you're the new guy and you're calling some engineer with 30 years experience and they pick up the phone and they don't know what you know and what you don't know. And now they're like, well, go to this menu, go open that valve. And you're like, well, I don't know. What is a valve? What is a gate valve? What is that? What is feed water? And they're like, wait, you don't know this? Like, how long have you been here? It's easy to get frustrated on that end when the gap is just so wide in knowledge. And that's, I don't know, but companies they have to figure out how to cover that gap, because you can't just, I see a lot of online about people saying, well, this is how it should be. Well, I don't care how it should be. This is how it is. And we either have to adapt to it or we don't. And the companies that win are going to be the companies that adapt. And like what I was talking about earlier is, how do we make our product as easy as it can be versus, well, we just need to make smarter consumers. Because you can maybe make 10% smarter and they will achieve that. But if like Apple just said, well, in order to use the iPhone, people just need to be smarter, we're not going to make it intuitive, it's not going to be successful. Same thing with any burner control or boiler control. If it's not intuitive, yes, you can learn it, but you're not going to have great success and people are not going to be super comfortable with it.
Yeah, absolutely. To your earlier point too, like growing up, my dad and his brothers, they had a transmission shop in Orange County. So shout out on Maestro Transmissions in Orange County. I would spend my breaks going with my dad to these places, and he would literally show me like, all right, this is a transmission, this is a distributor, this is the engine, and then once we got into it, he's like, this is the planetary gear, the sun gear, this is first gear, reverse, and he's showing you all the different things. This is the valve body. All that was ingrained in me at an early age, maybe influenced me to take the path that I eventually did. I think, growing up with, having someone in the household guiding you too is definitely a plus, because it points you in the right direction. And to your point too on, the guy with 30 years experience, being able to identify teachers and instructors and mentors as opposed to the person with most experience, because that's not always the same guy. The guy with 30 years experience probably just wants to keep his head down, do his job, maybe not necessarily bring on anybody, or he's not the best teacher, but his knowledge has to go to somebody that can teach. I think the ability to teach is a whole different skill set than being able to do the job. So, although the information is there, being able to translate it to somebody, right? I think we talked about it when you were at the open house, right? You have the different style learners, the visual, the audio, and the doers. Everybody learns a little differently, but you got to be able to have a blend of all three to be able to effectively communicate to new hires and things like that. Because I think also on the hiring too, managing the expectations of a candidate, right? I mean, the need for employees is so high that do we need to be as restrictive? Like, I feel like we may turn away good candidates just because they don't check the right box. Like, hey, if someone's willing to learn, I think we can work with them. But I could teach people how to boil water and how to do this other thing. But if they come in with maybe more experience and aren't willing to learn, then that's doing yourself a disservice at the hiring stage too. So a little bit of both.
It's hard to quantify those soft skills of, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to take initiative? And it's really what it is, are you willing to figure out a problem? Because I just posted this on LinkedIn, but like, no amount of training classes can get you to a point where you know everything. and you will always feel like you don't know something, especially when you walk into a boiler room, and you will always feel uncomfortable with certain situations of, well, I don't really know. And if you just say, well, I need more training, or I need to call somebody, or somebody else needs to do this, like, you're the wrong person for the job. Or you have to change your mindset, because no amount of training classes will ever prepare you for every single situation unless you literally work in one boiler room and you learn everything top down and spend 30 years doing one thing. But that is not the case typically with most people, and you have to be adaptive. And if you say no to opportunities more than say yes, employers are going to struggle to find you useful. But on the employer side, it's hard. It's a big investment. You need people now, but you really have to give them a 2 to 3 year runway and have metrics along that way of like, hey, are we making progress? Is this person turning out? And no matter what, if they are not improving, you either have to do an internal look of say like, hey, like, is this us or is this the person? Like, like they could be a great person, but they just may not be cut out for the job that you hired them for. So you could either pivot or you got to let them go. And I see a lot of companies just hold on to people that are probably not cut out for the job, but an extra body is what they need. And it's easy in the short term, but in the long term, there's all kinds of team dynamic issues and stuff that, you invest in these people and, oh, well, I've had 5 years experience, but they barely know what's going on because they weren't onboarded and trained correctly, or they have a very low ceiling, and the employer just doesn't want to admit it because they can't get people to come on. But like, I think the whole hiring issue is just marketing. Nobody knows about what you do. If I have never heard of your company and I am actively seeking boiler companies, and I am constantly on the internet and on social media and looking at boiler contractors and boiler manufacturers and everything, and I have never heard of your company, how do you expect some mechanical engineering college grad to have heard of your company and apply? So just because you're not getting good quality applicants doesn't mean they're not out there. You have to be visible, and you have to change your approach of, well, people come to us. We don't need to market. Customers call us. We have plenty of work. It's like, right, great. You're not marketing for you. You're marketing for people to work for you. And it's like, well, why would I come to work for you? And that's, I think, a big shift in contracting, even HVAC in general, of just, there's so many jobs out there that employers really have to think differently of, why would somebody come work for us when they're 22 years old? And are we showing them the runway or career, or even 18? Because a lot of people are like, oh, college bad. And it's like, okay, great. But to somebody who just graduated high school, do they look at your company and say, hey, I can make a career out of this? Or is this, I'm going to get stuck in a $22 an hour job, and this is going to be a career ender? I think a lot of employers and people underestimate, like, college still has this enamor to it because it's 4 more years of guided pathway learning. Whereas with an employer, unless it's laid out perfectly on paper, you're basically just trusting your boss of like, hey, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to like learn something and move up the ladder, and you guys are going to teach me stuff, right? And of course, every interview, they're like, yeah, right, of course. And then day one, they're like, I don't know, go, here's your boiler room, go figure it out. You don't know what tools are? Well, go figure it out. And
here's the manual.
yeah. And it's, read the manual and call us if you need anything. And you can't do that. It's not a productive conversation on both sides. So only been with Miura. So you eventually made it over. You moved east a little bit. And how do you think the boiler market is changing from now to 15 years ago, of trends of what is popular, what is not popular? Do you think it's growing, shrinking? What do you think the market's going to look like in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, so from when I started and coming from California, emissions was like the big thing. Efficiencies, emissions, and like the utilization of the resources, right? Fuel, gas, propane or oil, not even oil. You can't really burn oil over there, but how much water are you using? How much water are you draining? So that was a big driver of the industry in California because everybody was looking to reduce their footprint, their emissions, and their utilization of water, right? Because I don't know if you know, but like in California, it almost sounds like every once in a while you hear like, and they're running out of water. Farmers don't have water, they can't irrigate, or they're not given the quantities they need. They're arguing over the Colorado River and who gets how much right now. So, you know, being efficient in those areas was a benefit for us to be able to, enter the market. Then that being said, having been in it, right, we've learned how to boil water. We've kind of done it pretty efficiently, small footprint. The thing that I've noticed, at least from my point of view, is like um, connectivity. So because of the reduced workforce and the ability to get even trained operators, like not just service techs, but people operating the equipment, they've had to do more with less. So I've seen, operators with licenses that, they're over there recording things manually, right? Like just walk over to the boiler with a pen and paper and writing down the number that they see on the equipment, and then moving on to the next one, the next one, the next one. And they got to go work on the compressors and the chillers and conveyors and whatever else. Um, I think the monitoring, which is like what I'm working in, has definitely driven some adoption. Like every boiler room that I'm involved with now, it's like, hey, I've got to be able to be in my boiler room without actually being there. I need to be able to see it somehow, whether that is through remote monitoring, like the subscription that we provide or the service that we provide, or even just locally. Like I need to get the data from my equipment to a centralized location because most people aren't sitting there watching their pot boil, right? They've got other things to do, but they need to be able to have access to logging that with a computer, not with some dude that you pay, time and a half to write it on pen and paper because, he's working the first and part of the second shift. So, uh, like I said, driving not just resource efficiency, but like humans as the resource people, they've got to be able to do more with less and making them more efficient so that they can not have to hire as many people. I don't know, that's a weird way of putting it, but having to do more with less, right? Having to be able to like make that person almost everywhere at once because of the level I have. I could see every alarm that comes in, so I get many alarms and cautions every day, and I'm not in those boiler rooms, but I can see them. I know that those things happen, and we can dispatch accordingly, right? We can use the resources that we have locally to get out there. So uh, other than that, not just on the communication side, but um, greenhouse gas reduction, renewables, those have been some pretty interesting drivers of the industry, right? We've got people kicking the tires around biofuels, digester gases, and being able to utilize those in times of low fuel availability. Like if they get curtailed, can they use something like a digester gas that they're making on site? Um, Electrification is another, using electricity to boil water. If you're small enough, I think that you can, there's an avenue for that, mainly because it's so expensive. But if you can handle peak loads or maybe some trim off the top, if you can get some sort of subsidy with it, then I would definitely see that being an advantage. And then the last one being hydrogen. Our parent company in Japan has a hydrogen boiler. It, it's pretty complex, right? I think you have to have like a nitrogen purge, and the flame eye sensors are different. The the vessel is a little bit more robust, but and then the fuel trains are unique because they have to contain hydrogen. Some companies that are producing hydrogen as a byproduct want to be able to like capture that and utilize it as a fuel as opposed to just burning it or flaring it or, I won't say venting it, but they want to get some utilization of their byproduct. So, being more efficient in utilizing something that's a product and using it as a reactant so that they can get more bang for their buck, so to speak. So those I think are the drivers of the industry right now, and people who can navigate between them, provide a solution for electric or hydrogen, and on top of that being all networked and communicating. Those are large drivers in the industry. I don't know. What do you see?
Yes, I agree. I was thinking about this the other day I'm relatively young, and in the last 10 years, it's amazing how quick we went from electrify the world, and if we don't, the oceans are going to rise and melt the ice caps and the world's going to end, to let's install 300 diesel-fired generators and turbines for data centers that use 10 million gallons a day of water. And so we went from that to in 10 years. So it's interesting to see, even at like AHR, the conversation between what electrify the world was 3 or 4 years ago versus today. And I've seen a lot of, I don't think it makes sense for the whole electrify conversation unless for some reason you get electricity super cheap or you have a super small application. And the all the biogas and hydrogen, while I think they're great, unless it's a byproduct, I don't think anything's replacing natural gas. If we invested and do all this stuff, like as long as the government regulation or if there's government incentives to install electric boiler and whatnot, like, yeah, companies will do it. But if there's no incentive and it comes down to a pure business basis, natural gas is probably always going to win. So it's how do we burn natural gas as efficiently as possible? And I think how we do that, like we've already basically, I mean, we reached basically the physics limit, but the actual engineering of it versus the ongoing maintenance in a yearly time is much different. And your boiler and engineering is only as good as the person who commissions it and the person who monitors it. And I think the connectivity in a boiler room, AI in a boiler room, is probably the biggest unlock for companies. And it's not, as you were saying, like hiring less people. Like statistically, with the current birth rate, there are less people to hire versus 50 years ago. It's not that, oh, we're not able to hire more people. Like companies literally can't hire more people because they can't find them. So how do we still do the same operations with less people? Well, you have a connectivity system, but I don't know what this looks like. And I know this isn't all AI, but you, instead of somebody trending your stack temp and saying like, hey, our stack temps are slowly increasing, what causes that? Let me go look into that, versus AI saying, hey, your stack temps are increasing, and 5 years ago it started increasing. I noticed this trend. Go check this. Go check this. This is what happened 5 years ago, because you may have totally different operators. So it's how do we connect everything in the boiler room so that it talks and that we have data that's actually useful, because data is cheap. Data is easy in 2026. Data that tells us something, tells you a story, and you can make business decisions off of is totally different, because you have to have somebody that looks at that data. And well, I would love to say people with operator licenses or, people with training would know what to do. They don't always know what to do. And you're relying on, it's kind of like key man syndrome. You're relying on 1 to 15 people to operate your boiler plant that spends $2 million in gas every year. We should probably outsource as much as possible to technology in order to get that extra 5% efficiency or 2% efficiency. But that ends up being a lot of savings. But you can like buy a feed water tank from a manufacturer, buy a boiler from another manufacturer, buy a softener, and like you can piece together a whole boiler room. But it's the connection between all the equipment and the connection to the rest of the plant or whatever, and like making everything integrate. You got to have a really good integrator. You got to have somebody that knows controls and understands sequence operation, all that stuff. Whereas if you get everything from the same manufacturer in your boiler room, it's been tested together, it connects, and that's what you've been working on. And like that, there's so many benefits to it. And the technology is there right now. Like it's possible, but it's just done so poorly right now. Purely, I think it's just from an education level of just companies and people are just not educated enough in order to sell the benefits of, hey, this is what a fully connected boiler room looks like, and this is how it would save you money. If you're an average service company or mechanical contractor, it's like, well, why would I install this or do this upgrade? And you have to have somebody that can say like, hey, like this is why, and you know, hey, we're going to prevent scaling your boiler. That could cost you $40,000 repair bill and like all this stuff. But it's having that conversation and having a pathway. Whereas like with Miura Connect, like you've spent a lot of time putting it together. And I want you to talk more about it. What is the benefits of it having the water softener connected to the boiler and everything else of like one central system versus like a ton of different pieces that all connect together via Modbus or BACnet, and the employer or the owner just sees like data points and then has to make sense of it. Like, what is Miura Connect doing that can help owners? Because it's really, you got to think about like the whole reason is, can the owner make sense of it and understand how their boiler room is operating versus you just got to have an experienced boiler person in there to interpret the data, because that's, you're lost at that point.
Yeah. So you reminded me of kind of how this whole podcast between you and I got started, right? I think you and I I approached you at the ABMA booth at AHR. I'm like, hey, you're that boiler guy, boiler wild. You're like, yeah. I'm like, hey, I'm Jonathan, blah blah blah. And then we started talking about open house, and then your experience with that, and we got to swing open the doors and see that, and you got to hear about our president's vision, and what we call it is a complete solution and life cycle partners, and that's what we try and do with our customers and our reps, right? We don't want to just be the boiler person or the boiler supplier, right? We want to put together a system for you from the water all the way out to the steam, and then eventually past that, right? So we want to be able to provide the complete solution where it's, for lack of a better term, turnkey, right? You get a boiler room from us. And in that aspect, I think you were able to see, the softener talks to the water hardness monitoring unit, and it tells you whether it needs to do a regeneration or not. And if it misses it and there is hardness detected, that sends a signal to the boiler to mitigate that. How does it do that? It opens the surface blowdown. It starts draining a bunch of the water so that it's trying to get rid of that mineralization that could accumulate on the tubes at scale, right? We have a chemical controller that's also based on usage, right? So if the boilers are running at 100%, the chemical dosing's at 100%. If they're, somewhere in a low fire capacity, it's lead lagging the chemical pumps to slow down and not pump as much. So, and the controller itself has several different, we call them control patterns, but patterns that we can use to optimize like a boiler room. So you can have a light load situation, a heavy load, and then we try and program that at the commissioning stage. Miura Connect ends up being like the cherry on top, right? The last thing that is commissioned, like in my experience from commissioning boiler rooms. Most of the time you have some general contractor telling you that you need steam, and then you're kicking back to him. He's like, well, you want steam? I don't even have the water softener pipe, so we need to get that going first. So, once we bring on the system from softener to tank to chemical dosage and making sure water levels controlled in the tank, then we can get steam. Usually the last thing, even after the controls aspect, is the monitoring, because they want to be able to at least, live fire the boiler, run steam through a plant, then they'll worry about monitoring sort of after the fact. For me, yeah, I think that, Miura's vision is to provide that complete solution so that at least in that portion of the powerhouse, right, we can say that from here, you can have one centralized point with Miura Connect to access your boilers, your chemical dosage, your controller, your softener, your water monitoring, and then we send that to either, like I said, the server or to your building automation side from one point, right? If this were a piecemeal, like you were talking about Modbus, you'd have to have a Modbus link or adapter or port at each device, right? And previously we've had to do that before Miura Connect. We had some options where we would put a Wago Modbus on each boiler, and then we'd duplicate sensors. So we'd have 2 steam pressure sensors, several thermocouples that are measuring the same thing, one to our boiler, one for the Modbus. Now we're able to pull that data off of the CPUs of the device and send it out as, through one channel, one tube, essentially, to your site, whether that's the server or local Modbus or backman. So I think it does provide a single point in that you don't have to go and commission every single device as its own unit to communicate. It's coming in through one thing, and we're actively looking to increase our product offering with what it's connecting to. So as we bring on new products, we're looking to do reverse osmosis here shortly. We have a new the nickname for it was like the on-site analysis kit. It's not a kit, it's more of an assembly, but what it does is it monitors the boiler water. So we were talking earlier about workforce, right? This thing actively monitors boiler water. Specifically, it measures this for us, because we dose silica, it measures the silica and the pH of each boiler during the day. Right now it's in development. We have a beta test on it at a customer site. We're gathering data, but that's also one less thing that a person has to do, right? They don't have to go and physically take the sample. We have a machine that's automating that and making sure that it's sampling that periodically, and then we're logging that on Miura Connect. Also looking, like I said, constantly expanding product lines, finding ways that we can get either some sort of communication to it if it's actively, broadcasting, or if we're using external signals, such as just a duplication of sensors where we can add a dry contact or 4 to 20 milliamp sensor for things such as a pressure sensor or flow meter and thermocouples. So, we're actively looking at ways that we can expand even past or outside the boiler room and extend our offerings so that we are putting together more. Previously we called it total solutions, now we're calling it complete solutions. So being able to drive that, I think, has been our president, Paul O'Donnell's vision, and he's been communicating that every time, we're interacting with perhaps customers or at our open houses. We're saying that this is what we're trying to do, this is how we're trying to do it, and we want to take you along on this journey. If you would allow us, we'll provide you with as much as we can for an offering.
On the complete solutions connectivity, so for the owner side of things, so once again, data is great, but if you don't know what to do with the data, it's basically just noise, and you end up with 5 to 10 years of data, and people are like, oh, this flow meter broke. Well, we weren't even monitoring anyway, so we're not going to fix it. So is there the ability from an owner side of thing to monitor how much water they're using versus how much fuel they're using versus how much steam they're using, and have that data readily available where it on a dashboard where it makes sense?
Yeah, so we're working towards that. Some of the features that you're talking about existed in one of our previous monitoring systems. We called it SteamNet. Um, it was local only, right? Once it was there, you had it at that one terminal, and you could only really view it from there. We're accessing now more of the CPU in the boiler and the controllers themselves, so we'll be able to actually pull not just the live monitoring, but some of the archival data, such as like running hours, cycle counts, things like that. Like we don't actually have to physically observe them; we can pull them off of the CPU now, and we're looking to implement that as an update to Miura Connect. I think that leads to my next point, which part of CSLP was to, instead of being fix it when it breaks, emergency repairs, dispatch overnight because it broke during third shift, right? We're looking at more of a predict and prevent method. So by accessing those cycle counts, we're going to be able to create flags or triggers that once something hits a certain point or criteria in terms of cycle count, we're going to say, hey, based on the manufacturer's recommendation, 500,000 cycles for, let's say, a motor starter, we're going to send you, and it right now is a notification, so a text or an email, but it could even be just a window on the website that says, hey, this thing is past its cycle count. Maybe you should repair it, right? Sort of like the check engine, like you're going to have a yellow indication that hey, there's something that needs to be done. Big picture mode would be like, okay, not only that part needs to be replaced. Hey, do you want to buy it from us right here? You can click a button and then purchase it. No. One of the other items that we're doing to engage the customers is on the subscription side. We're looking to make it not just a data platform, but rather like a service platform. So we're engaging them with things like tech checks where our support teams are making comments on the way that their system is running. They'll make suggestions for feed water temperature, or like, hey, you're misfiring a lot. We think we should probably dispatch. We have what we call is a foresight tool, or project foresight, what we called it, but the ability to not only see upcoming service, but to put tasks on the calendar. So like, hey, I have my monthly visits. That's going to be visible. So you'll have access to essentially a service schedule, a PM schedule for your equipment. So typically, with our service agreements, we could have up to several visits per month, right? A water sampling plus inspections or as needed for emergency service. Those could be plot on a calendar through a task schedule, so we could see what in the future we need to be doing for that customer. So they're able to see that we're there for them.
With the remote monitoring, that's one that I think is highly underutilized, and there's a lot of issues around it as far as just on the company side of misunderstanding of a lot of companies will just say, no, nothing remote. We don't want any of that, and lock everything down. Everything gets locked down, and it's more of a training systems of like, hey, like let's actually look at the business side of things, because as labor costs have skyrocketed and the cost of travel and insurance and everything have skyrocketed, not every problem needs to be a service call. And I think a lot of employers still think, hey, we have a problem in our boiler room, needs to be a service call. Call the service company. And that's something where remote connectivity of, hey, we can see your whole boiler room, let's log in. And it could be just a 15-minute login and then a phone call of, hey, like I just logged in, go check this. We're seeing this issue. And like kind of walking through a couple pre-diagnostic troubleshooting steps to avoid that expensive service call. And it also benefits the service provider, such as Miura or any other service company, because when you have remote connectivity, it's not like all these service companies just have service techs just sitting by of, oh yeah, we have all these people available and just no work for them. Like, companies are overloaded. So if you can reach out to that customer that's 4 hours away and get on a half hour, diagnostic visit with them over the phone and be looking at their stuff on your computer, like, there's so much benefit to that versus, yeah, we'll send a service tech out there. We don't have anybody available till next week. And then, since it's 4 hours, they'll be there Wednesday afternoon, and it may take a day, may take two, or even they drive 4 hours out there and then they go, yep, we're resetting the low gas pressure switch because it was tripped. That was the problem, and your operators couldn't figure that out. Well, here's a $2,000 bill. And instead of, now you can log in and just be like, yeah, this is what it is. Go check this, go check that. There's a lot of benefits to that for the employer and also for the service companies, because a lot of service companies, yes, everybody loves to make money, but a lot of them feel bad for those dumb service calls where there's no easy way to like bill for, like, oh yeah, you just needed to push the reset, but you were 4 hours away, so our tech had to drive 4 hours, push reset, drive 4 hours back. Like there's real costs to that, and it costs employers a lot. So that's what I really see, like, remote connectivity. If you can make that data available to service companies and then to the owner where it makes sense, and they understand what is going on in their boiler room, to the average person versus you have to be experienced to look at this data and interpret it. Like, that's where AI could come in and teach of, like, hey, this is how you interpret this data and this is what we're seeing and all that stuff. Like, there's just so many possibilities out there, and it's all possible now, but it's, people say, well, why doesn't it happen now? It's training, education, and it's also, I think people are slow to change. But if you have a business case for it and the owner understands that business case versus, like, just trust us, or, like, oh, what is this connection thing that's, a $50,000 line item, or you want to do what? Like, yeah, we haven't done that before. I don't understand that. Like, we're not going to do that. Like, okay, like, let's understand the life cycle cost of this boiler room and understand, like, what this will look like over the next 10 years versus the immediate cost now. And it just comes down, I think, to education of, hey, you can avoid these expensive service calls and expensive downtime through this connection versus somebody has to physically show up every single time, and it's not always a legitimate service call.
Yeah. We recently had our rep conference, and we kind of focus grouped some of that with not only the salespeople, but we had service there as well. Sales was arguing about, the complexity and all the additional line items, like you said, for the monitoring, right? And the first thing, we had a sales guy and a service guy from our reps at the same table, and he's like, hey man, this thing not only did exactly what you just described, saved them a 4-hour drive, but knowing, just the service call, usually something like, hey, my boiler's broken, come fix it. I don't know what's wrong. I'm getting alarm 7 and not even maybe identifying the code. But this way he was able to review it, kind of do a rewind and look at history and be like, okay, I can at least bring the right parts, right? That's another thing, is knowing you could dispatch them and be like, well, I don't have it. Now I've got to either overnight it and, or have someone drive it out, which is additional cost, right? So we've seen it from both sides where it's being used as a tool for exactly that, to reduce some of that overhead. So we have a service agreement. It's one of our contracts that, to your point, right? Most service companies are kind of like waiting, I think, for you to fail so they could be like, yes, I get to retube your boiler now. And then the chemical company's like, in the background going, yeah, it's terrible that your tubes failed, and there's really no liability from not failing, I guess, except that they're going to be maybe switched out. But Our service contracts are sort of a fixed rate per boiler, right? So we'll cover parts, labor, travel. We'll guarantee your pressure vessel, with certain qualifiers, right? We would like our softener, our chemical, and monitoring. And that $2,000 service call, now it's on us. It's on us to keep that boiler running because it's going to cost us. It's going to take from our margin to dispatch somebody. So it's in our best interest to keep that boiler running. That's through our Miura maintenance contract, our highest level one. We have others that are tiered, and there's some other coverage, but that's some of the, when we want to say we stand behind our product, we say, hey, we'll provide this additional coverage, this service agreement. You pay a fixed, predictable amount every year, and we'll come out. It's on us to fix it. So obviously, we're going to try and minimize our call outs, whereas maybe other companies are saying, well, it's a 2-week job, or I gotta retube your boiler or upgrade your burner. So, like I said, I think there's benefit to that to a company that's looking at some monitoring where they're like, hey, what's the point? Why am I going to pay this much? You're barely here, or but the point is that we're actually there to prevent the issue, not to fix it, right? When it breaks, we're trying to get it so that it's always running and keep that uptime. And on the cybersecurity front, yeah, I see that too, where a project will get put out and the scope is, all this connectivity. And then once we get to the weeds of it, then we have IT departments that are like, hey, whoa. We've got to fit you in somehow in our scheme where you're not breaking our policy. So we try and provide options, right? We could be on their network. The boiler exists in its own sort of localized network. But if we want to get the data out, we provide options. So the best, most secure is a hardwired option. That way they can control the traffic. We let them know what the endpoints are, where the data is supposed to go. But we can also provide not just wireless through Wi-Fi, but a cellular option. So if for some reason their equipment needs to, or the equipment needs to be air gapped from their network, we can have all that happening and then send it out and then keep that connection separate from any sort of interconnections that they may want to have with their internal networks. We want to make it as flexible as possible when putting them in. So whether they want the control of having it on their network or having a cellular option that air gaps them.
Do you have any other examples of how companies could save money through having a connected boiler room? Obviously, your examples will be with Miura, but a lot of this stuff can also apply to other connected boiler rooms, because I see a lot of equipment is just going in, and yeah, they may get some backnet connection to the rest of the building, but there's nobody really enters the boiler room unless there's an alarm going off. So it's like, what other benefits could there be to just connected boiler room with data that companies can put a real business case to versus this feels good to have all this data?
Yeah, absolutely. So from what I've seen, it's not just the data and the monitoring that's nice. It's the ability to, we pair it with coverage. So we say, we're on the line if anything fails, right? Parts wise, or even the pressure vessel. And so we're guaranteeing that uptime. We're a bit unique in that we do provide sort of what we call MI, or multiple installation option, where if you have, say, a specific steam load that you're trying to achieve, we'll get there with what we call N+1, or one with redundancy. But in the event that you're maybe a single boiler operation, which we have several of even with Miura's, that boiler is a bottleneck in your production. And not only the cost of what it costs, to get someone out there, or the parts, but sort of the hidden costs. And we end up hearing about this in places that are those examples, those single boiler rooms or single point of failure, is that when that boiler goes down, it shuts down the whole plant, right? Nothing can run that was based off of that heat load, whether it's for example, in the laundry, their washers don't run. Their hot water tanks aren't getting warmed. if they use steam tunnels, those aren't getting steam. So you can shut down a facility that's not being necessarily maintained well. Do you really want like a couple $100 part shutting down a many thousands dollar facility? No. So having that I'll call it air cover, right? Where you not just your operators looking, but the technicians that service that facility, they're getting those notifications. Our representatives are getting those notifications. They know ahead of time what's happening, often sometimes before the operators on site do. Like, hey, I think we're going to see something here pretty soon. We want to be able to mitigate the downtime for the customer. That's unacceptable in many cases. And we have other installations, much larger ones that are, about 10 boilers where they can run at maybe 8 boilers. But if they have 7 boilers down, now that's affecting their production, their whole facility production. And you're talking about entire batches of their operation that could potentially go to waste, and dozens of people that are standing around not producing for them. So the hidden costs of the operation, I think, are where we can provide the most value by keeping that system up and online. It's not just the equipment, but their processes and their output. That's where I think you have the benefit of maintaining a monitored piece of capital equipment, is that thing is making money for you. And when it's not, it's costing you more than just the equipment and the service.
Your boiler room is not a cost to be cut, building owners. It is something to invest in. So many,
Absolutely.
there's a whole science to preventative maintenance, but there's this cycle of preventative maintenance where you get some maintenance manager, operations manager in a facility, and they go, oh, we're spending $2 million a year doing whatever. Let's cut it by 20%. And my bonus, gets better with the less we spend. So they may go with a cheaper water treatment provider, or even say, hey, we're going to do water treatment in-house, or we're going to extend our salt delivery to every other month instead of every month. And, because who needs a water softener? And we're going to cut our boiler operators, and our maintenance people are now going to be working on the line instead of just solely in the boiler room, and do all this stuff. And there's this like cyclic cycle of, you can cut from equipment and cut from what you're doing, and you won't see the repercussions. They are delayed, and it may be 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 5 years, where I see it online all the time of like, oh, we have this boiler and we're cutting open the Scotch Marine boiler, full retube, full new tube sheets and everything, because they filled it full of scale. And it's like, okay, whatever that costs, $50,000 plus. It's like, well, how much money would have cost to just maintain your water softener and to check for hard water? Like, so yeah, you saved a little bit of money in the short term, but then that huge repair bill comes, or, hey, we melted our boiler because we didn't, do the maintenance properly, and now we have a $300,000 replacement for a new boiler that was only 8 years old. But, the person who cut all the maintenance is now promoted to a different job, and they're long gone. So the repercussions are gone. And that cycle continues at facilities, where I think there's a lot of benefits to, not saying that cycle won't stop, but having a dashboard and having a connection of, hey, this is what our boiler room is. This is baseline. And the average person can come in and say, this is baseline, this is what it should be. And when you get outside of baseline, it's, okay, well, this is what can happen and what it can cost us. And you can put some numbers to it. It's very easy with a dashboard. I used to work at a lot of corrugator plants, and they would have one boiler, and the boiler would be down. They're like, this is critical. Our corrugator's down. This is critical. But nobody's working and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, if this is your critical process, why do you only have one boiler? Like, how does this make sense? But anyways, outside of that, it's how do we make data so visible to the average maintenance person or business person, where you go, hey, this is what your boiler room is costing you to run every year, and this is normal. And if you cut beyond this, these are the long-term repercussions that could end up in the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year marks of, you want your boiler to last 20 years. This is what you should be doing versus how do we just make this year or next quarter look great, which I understand will happen, but it's all about visibility of data. And when you can make data turn into simple English, I think you can see a lot of benefits versus, well, they should just know that they need to maintain their water softener. Well, that's obviously not true because every day I go on LinkedIn and people are cutting apart boilers full scale in 2026. Like, everybody is well educated on what a water softener should be. But when you have a facility run and the water softener is not alarming, nobody cares about the boiler room until the boilers aren't making steam. And that's where connectivity, and even with Miura, with the whole connection with the water softener, say, hey, we have hard water. Hey, we have hard water. Hey, we have hard water. And sending alarms before, there's actual critical failures.
Yeah, that's, in you said you hit the nail on the head with putting it in plain English. We want to take it even a step further and go, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? I get this often, but something as simple as just like red, green, yellow, this is the status. That's the light on the boiler itself. And if you're not in the room, you don't see it. But one thing that bothers me, at least on equipment, is like when it's operating in yellow when it should be green. Like that's a notification to something should happen. Now we have like several of those, right? We have, hey, air filter, blow down, scale caution, hey, you're getting there. And then when it's red, that's the interlock. You're not burning anymore. And we've translated those colors even to the dashboard. So you're like, hey, if you're not in green, something should be checked. So yeah, something as simple as that, I think, is a good way to communicate issues and items. But one thing I have observed, especially from technicians and reps that maybe service many customers that are connected, was notification fatigue. I recently went to a hospital, and they're doing exactly what we're saying, right? They're networking all their equipment. And during our pitch to them, they'd already bought the equipment, but when we were talking about the subscription, I had said, oh, and by the way, you get a text and email notification. And then the service guy rolled his eyes. Great. Another notification. Like, he's probably buried under, hundreds of texts and emails that something's under caution or alarm. We have to find a way to also not be ignored, or at least maybe prioritized higher, because that guy who's got many pieces of equipment to run is now feeling maybe overloaded with his systems right at the hospital, and our technicians too, where it's like, yeah, I saw that one come in, but then I had about another dozen cautions come in after that. I think notification fatigue is one thing I've been battling, trying to figure out how to best communicate or even prioritize. We've had requests that are like, hey, maybe granular notification alerts where we can go in and say, all right, this is most important, this not so much. Although we don't want to say a blowdown is not important, right? If you're high conductivity, you can have carryover, you can have issues with your water chemistry. It's maybe not as critical as like the scale caution. That should be treated maybe at a higher prioritization than a blowdown. So maybe throw in different gradients of orange or something like that.
I think, don't quote me on this, but I think notification fatigue was part of the reason for the Deepwater Horizon disaster, the oil spill in the Gulf of America now, I guess, the BP. So if your operator is sitting there and they just get alarm after alarm after alarm after alarm, and the alarms are, it's not like something's broken. It's just notifying you of like, hey, your boiler's at 110 PSI when your set point is supposed to be 100 PSI. They go, oh, okay, great. And then they just keep, and what ends up happening is they silence the alarm. So then when the boiler sends the alarm of, hey, your boiler's at 150 PSI and not 100 PSI, the alarm is silenced, so they never get that alarm, or they never see it, and then they can't take action. And that's what happens is with data is I've seen some of these operations managers' emails, or I've seen their cell phones, and they'll show me, and they're like, yeah, this connection thing is great. But then I turn off my notifications because I would get 140 emails a day, or I would get 140 text messages a day. And when you get 140 text messages from your boiler, it is very hard to care about something when you're trying to do your job. And you have to be able to understand, like, okay, what is important versus what is like, hey, we just need to like schedule service for the next month versus like, this needs to be taken care of now. And that's what basically notification fatigue is to the people out there who don't know what it is or haven't heard of it before.
Yeah. One thing we did to mitigate that was to put daily and weekly and monthly summaries. So like, yeah, you're not getting one for each individual alarm, but you may get one at the end of the day that says, hey, you had like 12 notifications. Like that's more than what you're used to it just tells you, and then you can go in and see the list once you click through. Another thing too is closeness to the customer, and I'm going to circle back to the maintenance agreement. If a computer is telling you something, right, like it's just a, hello, first name, comma, last name, you have insert boiler alarm here at the, hour, month, day, right? So that's going to kind of not carry as much weight as, like I said, with our service agreements. If you're close to the customer, you may have actually someone physically there telling you, hey, those alarms that we just got, we need to like address those, schedule an additional service call or address it right now, right? Like, hey, I can go and maybe it's something as simple as, like you say, for softwares, like just run the regeneration. Obviously the resin is not removing the hardness anymore, or hey, let me do that blowdown for you. So closeness to the customer, I think actually has more weight than even the monitoring, but I think the monitoring just, it improves your performance. Like it's not meant to be the standalone. I don't think it can ever replace the human touch. So it's a tool. It's a tool for us to help ourselves do better and do more with the resources that we have. So, because they're very valuable. The human resource, the humans are the most precious resource of a company. And one thing at that same AHR event, we were able to sit in on a seminar that our chief global group officer, David Miyauchi, he hosted a Harvard business professor, Professor Takeuchi. And he asked a very simple question to the group. He goes, who pays your paycheck? And a lot of people were like, well, our company, Miura, or the rep or CB, who was there, they're like, they pay the paycheck. And he's like, that's actually not true. It's the customer's money that pays your paychecks. Miura or your company is just merely the pass-through. They're collecting it and distributing it, but what's paying you is the customer's money. Miura has no money if they didn't have customer money. So being able to provide solutions to people that need it and when they're asking for it is, I think, pretty crucial, because there can always be problem finders. Those people exist. They're a dime a dozen, but problem solvers, those are the ones that help get things done. And if we can put these tools in their hands, then I think we've multiplied and amplified their ability to perform. And that will lead towards, things like getting paid more and bonuses and higher efficiencies, because you're going to have metrics that measure you against someone else who isn't using those tools. And they'll be like, well, why is this person outperforming this other person? Well, we've had simple tools before, right? Like mechanical advantage. Now we need to leverage our digital advantage. I think that's where I'll put that into context, is that it ultimately, we're trying to get money from the customer and obviously maintain the relationship so that we can continue growing together. It's got to be mutually beneficial.
I think a lot of people hear that and they think, oh yeah, of course, the manufacturer, these service companies, all they want is money. Well, yes, but it's also, hey, we installed this Connect system and this extra visibility, and it saved you 10%, and it only cost you a 0.5% of that 10%. So you really are saving like 9.5%. So while you're paying us more money and it looks like you are spending more in this bucket, in the overall bucket, you are spending less money. And that's something, even with like steam trap surveys, there are so many companies out there that won't do a steam trap survey or won't repair their steam traps, even if you mathematically go like, hey, your payback is like 2 months on this for these steam traps. And they just don't care because the maintenance budget is different than the bills or the budget for the natural gas. And they say, oh, we don't have the maintenance budget for that. So it's having that understanding for the customer of this is saving you money, even though it looks like on paper you are spending more. And then over the long term, you hopefully avoid that cycle of cut preventative maintenance, cut maintenance, huge capital cost. All right, cut maintenance, huge capital cost. And then you can get your boiler to last and not be cutting it apart every 5 to 10 years because it's full scale or you melted it and all this other stuff that happens when you are not monitoring your boiler room and you have no idea what's going on because you just don't have good data and good education operations around it. I think we've covered a good bit. Is there anything else you want to say, or how do people find you?
How do people find me? I guess you can reach me at, I'm gonna go old school for a minute, at our main line, 678-685-0929, extension 108. That's my direct line if you want to get a hold of me. Another one, Jonathan Sanchez at miuraz.com. I could spell that out. JONATHAN.SANCHEZ at MIURAZ.com. Yeah, I'm not really on the socials. I'm on LinkedIn if you look up Jonathan Sanchez. So that's how you can get in contact with me.
If you have any questions about Miura Boiler, go to miuraboiler.com. They have a rep locator as well. I'm sure a rep would be happy to answer any questions you have. But mostly, if you listen to this podcast, get to this point, I want you to think about connection, whether it's a Miura boiler or not. How do we connect and have data that is more visible for a building owner? Don't assume that they understand what you say of like, hey, your water softener isn't softening. They won't necessarily understand what that actually means and what the implications of that. So just writing that on a service report, that's not enough. How do we educate people in a way that the average person will understand? And then how do we get the boiler data in a way that the average person will understand? In whatever endeavor you do in the boiler room, that is my challenge to you. That is how we make the boiler room and the boiler world a better place. So thank you for coming on. And yeah, I'll have you back sometime.
Thanks for having me, Eric. We'll be in touch.